All right, so yes, we are having Roundtable 1, the philosophical roots of restorative justice. We will explore the various methodologies of restorative justice and their philosophical roots to answer the question of how RJ can lead the way. Following, we will have question and answer if we have time. So definitely put your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat. And of course, this is going to follow a circle format. And so our roundtable will mirror our traditions of a circle. And our first panelist on this roundtable is Shandine Yazzie, a peacemaker from the Diné Navajo people of Arizona. We have Michelle Armster, Executive Director for Mennonite Central Committee, focusing on conflict transformation and restorative justice. We have Brian Bourdierd, Teen Restorative Justice Leader. Shailly Agnihotri, founder of the Restorative Center. Gabrielle Burton-Hill, Community Advocate and Restorative Justice Leader. And Caroline Durham, Executive Director for St. Charles Center for Faith+Action. Thank y'all for being with us.
And I just wanted to say that the full bios of everybody are now on the website, and we can also add those PDFs in the chat for everybody to look at. And we're still waiting for Shandon. If she joins us, Angel, will you just please make her a panelist if she's somehow in the other group?
Yes, I will. And I will place the bios in the chat for everyone, the link to the bios.
Thank you. So before we run a circle, usually I set up a centerpiece, which I have done right now too. I have a candle, rocks, a little bowl of water, some live plants. Right now I have a corn stalk, and traditionally we've been using Nelson Mandela's autobiography to begin the first circle in any series. And the way we do it is as follows. So Brian, just pick a number for me from 1 to 625.
25.
I'm sorry?
25.
Okay. Afterwards, the older sister told the younger, "You will waste your whole life if you fall in love with such a backward boy." But I'm happy to say that the young lady did not listen. She loved me as backward as I was. Eventually, of course, we went different ways and drifted apart. She attended a different school and qualified as a teacher. We corresponded for a few years, then I lost track of her. But by the time I'd considerably improved my table etiquettes. A paragraph from Long Walk to Freedom. Person I've been thinking about recently has been my paternal grandmother. She was quite the matriarch. She had to be the matriarch of a family that experienced a period of being refugees, only taking what she could take in a pouch and taking her children with her. She believed in education more than anything. And she believed in the power of the mind. So I actually remember seeing her sitting there on a cot reading the newspaper, which for that generation of women, there weren't that many that were literate and so inclined. So I think about her also as just her core strength of keeping families going no matter what the circumstances. So we're going to go around in a circular pattern, the pattern that we just had shown. So when you're done speaking, just pass it to the person next to you in a clockwise direction. And next to me would be Caroline. So Caroline, who are you thinking about these days? Your elder.
Bishop Dr. Barbara Lewis King. Dr. Barbara is no longer earthly, but she was a 6'5" Black woman in Atlanta who knew at the age of 9 that she was meant to be a minister and heard from everybody, you can go be a missionary, but you can't be a minister. And Dr. Johnny Coleman, her mentor, said, that's just not how it is. Again, another over 6 foot Black woman who was in her power. And they're walking in the world. And I think of her today in part because I'm with people, including myself, who will graduate from the Barbara King School of Ministry. And the message she carried always is, spirit is within, and my spirit is your spirit, and your spirit is mine. And so she's very present always in the work of lifting up one another for the good of all. And to me, that's what restorative justice is if we will simply do that, it falls into place. So the person to my right is Michelle.
So the circular pattern we had set up earlier.
Oh, I apologize on the
No,
picture.
that's okay. It's Gabrielle. Yeah.
Good morning. I too, for some reason, have been thinking about my paternal grandmother, who unfortunately I did not know very well, but lately I've just been calling upon her to share with me her experience as a little girl and growing up in Mississippi, and how her experience of racism applies to my work today. Like, how did I get here to this restorative justice work? And I remember we didn't visit her much. You know, the country, well, still is up in arms and chaotic. But we would travel by train to Corinth, Mississippi. And this particular year, I believe it was either 69 or 70, because I was still an only child. My brother was born in 71. So I'm thinking it was either 69 or 70. And my father hadn't seen his cousins or friends in quite some time. He left Corinth when he was 18. He couldn't afford to go to college, so he joined the military. And his buddies came over to the house, and he was getting ready to leave. I remember him kissing my mother and I, you know, see you later. And my grandmother snatched me up and started running towards the car saying, Anthony, wait. You have to take Gabrielle with you. And my father's like, I'm not taking my baby girl with me. And she says, no, take her with you, because if they see a child in the car, maybe they won't kill you. And I don't remember much of what my grandmother said, but I remember that, and how that fear of my father being killed probably led to her early death. She had a massive heart attack at 47. And lately I've been wondering, Grandma, I never saw myself as an advocate. I was very introvert. Give me a book and leave me alone. But here I am being called to this. And I want her voice to speak through me of the pain that she endured, but also help me to heal from that and to leave space for others to heal. And I pass to Shannon.
And she is not here yet, so we can pass to Brian.
The person that's coming to mind right now is my mom, mainly thinking about how she came over here to this country and like did what she had to do and just got to where she is now, even though we may not be living in the best place, we're living in a place, and it's just all those things where it's just like I don't know, just thinking about how she went from a place that she didn't know too much about. It was able to provide for her kids and get to and find a place to live and decorate into the way she has now. And it's inspiring to me. And I'll pass it on to Michelle.
Well, before I begin, it's important for me to acknowledge the land that I am on and the history that brought my ancestors to this land. First, I acknowledge the original people, the indigenous people who thrive and thrived and lived for thousands of years on this land that they called Turtle Island. The land on which I live, this stolen land, is called the state of Kansas. However, Kansas is not the name of the original people. The people were and are the Kaw. The city where I reside is called Wichita, after the Wichita people. The land was and is also home for the Sac and Fox, the Pawnee, the Cheyenne, and for many others whose language and people are no longer here because of genocide, extermination, disease, and forced displacement. These people had families, communities, ways of being, and faith. Second, it is important for me to also acknowledge my ancestors, the stolen people, the Mende of Sierra Leone, and the Bisa of Burkina Faso. We were and are people stolen from the continent of Africa. We are not settlers, we are displaced people. Our bodies were stolen, and like the indigenous brothers and sisters, our language was stolen, our identities erased, and we too had families, communities, ways of being, and faith. So I have to take this time to acknowledge and celebrate that we are still here. I believe when I acknowledge the legacy of the indigenous peoples and that their land was stolen, and when I acknowledge the legacy of my ancestors and that we were stolen, I defy the lie of white supremacy that values domination, property, and things over people. Only then can we celebrate the truth that we are still here. And I think about my ancestor, great-great-grandmother, who was born on a slave ship. Her name is written down as Celia, and she came across on the slave ship, born on the slave ship. Her mother died during her birth. She was dropped off in the Bahamas and then at some point was brought to Virginia. So it's the memory of Cecilia that I call at this point. Thank you.
So what if our ancestors are with us now, and I believe they are, what do you hear them saying to us now? What are they asking us to think about in these moments? And I know for me, when I was worried about my daughter who got sick with COVID, and when I was, all the worries of life that this last year has entailed, the last few years, I just remember, I sort of hear this resonance of, you are much stronger than you think you are in times when I feel weak. So I hear that from her, and I'm wondering what you're hearing from your ancestors. And I will pass it now to Carolyn.
The loudest piece that I hear in this work is to utilize and own that I'm in white skin and that I have a responsibility in being in this white skin and how I do the work that I do and how I engage other white people. So that is one message that is very loud and large for me, a recognition that a call to action, a responsibility for learning and understanding what has been very present for me. So I was born and raised in New Orleans and in Baton Rouge, but New Orleans is where I am. And the recognition around what's lifted up recently is Mardi Gras Indians and the fact that Black masking is spiritual practice. And that I believe that there has been a entertainment creating of it in the way that whites view it. That's just an example. And so having conversations around not just the responsibility, but what action are we taking? What action must we take? And what listening are we to do in all of that? And I will pass it to Gabrielle.
Hmm. Lately, I don't know if I'm hearing my ancestor or it's because in the Bible is one of my favorite passages, and it speaks of fear. And this one scripture that I meditate on is, "Do not fear, for I am with you." And I do feel my ancestors are with me. And the scripture goes on to say, "For I will help you, I will strengthen you, and I will even hold you by your right hand." So not only am I being guided, but I'm being protected, strengthened, rejuvenated, and held. And I feel that even now, sitting in this house alone, I feel like it's full. I feel as if people are around me. And for everyone in this panel, do not fear. And I pass to Shannon.
Not here yet, so we're going to pass to Brian. I think we messed up with some time as she's on the West Coast, and I think there might be a time issue that we didn't sort out correctly. So hopefully she comes. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I would say what's speaking of what I feel like they're saying to me now, my ancestors, is just I don't know, something about being proud, I guess. I hope so. And yeah, that's what I'll say. And I'll pass it on to Mitchell.
Well, I hear my ancestors saying, "Baby, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you, but get your rest." And but get your rest part is what I find difficult most times. But that's it's starting from, you know, Cecilia, who was dropped off as a baby, all the way down to my mother, who now lives with me as she makes this journey through dementia. I hear my ancestors saying, "Baby, I'm so proud of you, but get your rest." Shailly?
Restorative justice has been described and defined in all sorts of ways. And I would love to hear what our voices, how our voices would describe it and define it. For me, a well-articulated restorative justice process is a system of human engagement which holds space for us to remember who we truly are so that we can connect to the essence of each other and thereby potentially build institutions that reflect that truth. So that is what I see, what I think restorative justice is at its essence. So I'm going to ask Caroline now if she could take a stab at defining it.
The first thing that comes to mind is breath. So true restorative justice flows through us always. It's not a time, it's not a place that's over there. It is within connection and grace. And so restorative justice means being grounded in self and other, because we're all connected. It is how we see one another and take the time to understand both the complexities and the layers, not just in the person or people that we are connecting with, but with ourselves and how they interplay. Because the systems that we're talking about have separated, have taken away what is the natural breath of encouragement and thriving. And so to me, that is restorative justice. And you can dive into the systems, and it comes up time and time again where you don't see and listen and know self in relation to other people. one another, interactions. Yeah, so breath. And I will pass it to Gabrielle.
Wow. Let me just first say thank you, Michelle. I'm going to get my rest. Thank you for that. True restorative to me. What's coming to mind now, more now than ever, is the restoration of family. But restorative justice, the honoring and acknowledgement of the harm that has been done to both those, the natives of the land and my stolen people. The true willingness and genuine call to face those harms and act towards healing genuinely, not just in for policy or paper, but to genuinely want to reconnect to folks and our earth, our planet. How we care for each other is restorative, how we uplift each other. And since families make up communities, it's important to uplift families and restore the heart and soul and true compassion and concern we have for each other, despite what we look like or where we live or how much money we have. Just wanting to be together in a genuine way, listening to understand and not necessarily reply. For me to be able to sit in front of my brother or sister and just hear and try to understand and rejuvenate us. The other day, someone said that this work can be a conduit to human evolution. And I thought that was so profound, that we are vessels to human evolution. And I pass to Brian.
For me, when it comes to this work, it's a bit of what Gabby was saying about being able to understand each other and just listen to each other without having to have the pressure of just having to speak because of having to speak or having to answer because that's what you have to do. And here, the thing I like is that you really have a choice, and you don't have to when you don't want to. You only speak when you feel like you should, when you feel like you have something to share. And that's really nice to me, that that choice. Another way I see this work is just as a great way to just be able to just sit and understand each other, to be able to look past differences, look past all the things that separate us, and just sit down, see each other as people, and deal with things as people. Uh, and something I wish is that I wish this type of process was more common, because of how well it works with getting people to understand each other and getting people to actually work together and see each other beyond all these different titles. Just see each other as a person first. And with that, I'll pass it on to Michelle.
Thank you, Brian. So when I think about restorative justice, I think the one thing I think about is Ubuntu, the South African concept of I am because we are, and we are because I am. So that understanding of both and that to me is a restorative concept, because it connects to the need to be connected that I think restorative justice allows for. I think for me, restorative justice is less about processes and more about understanding and concepts. There are values, I think, and that should be present, in my opinion, when we even think about or talk about processes. And so, you know, values such as, like I said, interconnectedness, and all of you mentioned that. I liked a breath, Caroline. I like, you know, that recognizing that we all breathe and we're all breathing the same air, and therefore we're all connected. That is a good reminder of just the essence of what it means to be human. I think it's also about humility, recognizing we don't know all the answers for everybody. And so we talk and we listen, and so that we can learn something, and possibly someone may learn from us. I think it's also about respect, accountability, and ultimately having right relationships with one another, right relationships with Mother Earth. And for me, there are values that are restorative values, that whatever process I engage in, that those values, I want those values to be present. And so I will speak those values into the situation, whether it's my family, you know, negotiating with my mother, you know, or with as an executive director engaging with my staff. So that's what comes to mind to me. The values, what are restorative values, and how they work and play out in all aspects of my life. Because I do think it's more of a way of life and not about a bunch of practices. Thank you, Shailly. And would you say your name so I'm not saying it incorrectly?
You're saying it perfectly.
Okay,
Shailly,
I just
perfect.
want
Thank you.
okay, thank you.
So Durham was speaking earlier and saying that I don't want to misquote him, but he said something to the effect that he wasn't sure there would be a benefit to having police officers and young people sit together. I disagree, because because I believe, so I guess this is where we're sort of like honing in what we're talking about here. I believe that police officers and young people sit together in a circle process over a period of time. The following potential things can happen. One, each person sitting in a circle process, I have witnessed, actually, when you're talking about breath and the pause, sitting in the circle process and not reacting to what somebody's saying because you're waiting your turn and there's a pause, there's a rhythm. I think you actually invoke the more responsive part of the self instead of the reactive self. All of us, especially in these charged times, could benefit from the more responsive aspect of ourselves and engagement, especially young people and police officers. So, I mean, I think that I could see some transformational possibilities of people sitting in circles that could be the foundation for institutional changes. So that's sort of my thought about that. So I just wanted to hear, like, you know, sort of these sort of aspects of restorative justice and how you believe they could impact our world in a way that speaks to you at this moment in time. So I will pass to Caroline.
I'll say yes, and of course. So many gifts and that come from connection. Part of what rises up in the way you framed it, in part, is when separation continues, understanding rarely arises. And so where there is that need to hear and be heard, to really get it, you take out or can process out ego. You can process out assumption within it, so that when there is real connection person to person, that's a nourishment of existence that cannot happen in separation. And part of what these systems want is separation. If the separation continues, the changes can't occur. The understandings of the impact of the mere presence of someone in a police officer uniform and how that has for countless people in communities. The empowerment of our young people. So to say we're going to listen in a society that really says, until you reach a certain age, there's no value in what you say, sort of. All of those pieces shift. And so, I mean, just within that one context, the engagement of restorative practices with police officers and youth is critical. We have to build it this way, right? We have to build from the babies that are being born and the young folks, and we also have to deal with us older folks walking the earth with all that we're carrying. Thank you, and I will pass it to Gabrielle.
I don't know why, because I had a different response planned, but I just flashed back to this incident where my daughter said to me, "What are you, the police?" because I was asking her about where she had been or something. And, you know, her screaming that out, even though she knew she was at risk of being in trouble, gave her power. And she saw me as this authoritarian person, not like a mother that was nurturing and understanding, which I was, but it really just put it into context. Now we know that the police and the youth disconnect is much more serious than my daughter's Raji and I relationship, because I'm not walking around with a gun. I'm not going to put her in jail, like all of these things. But it made me think how, if I didn't take the time to listen to her, and she would have just been carrying on all this, she would have been carrying this resentment towards me silently. And so then we would have another incident and we'd have this big clash, because I, as a mother, feel like I don't have to sit down and listen to you. I'm the mom, I pay the bills, you do as I say or not what I do, or bye. And so we have, in a society, has done that to our youth as a whole. Do what we say, go to school, sit down, shut up. If you don't like it, oh well. And now there is a cry from our youth like never before, that is not and cannot continue to be the way we address their human experience. Recently, we had a shooting in my small town of 3.4 miles, Newburgh, New York. And for some reason, the community is confused. It started at the middle school with the fight, and people know each other. So then probably the elder siblings are at the high school. Something broke up over there. So of course, our answer is to call the police, the state police, the sheriff, the DEA, and the FBI. 5 agencies on our babies, because that's what they are. But society has convinced white people in particular that our boys are not babies, that they're not boys, they're men. They're vilified at a very, very young age. And that's intentional. The system is doing exactly what the system intended to do. It's working. People say, oh, the system is not working. Yes, it is. It's working exactly the way it was intended. However, we have an opportunity, and I almost feel like an obligation, to create a new system. And that is going to happen when we adults humble ourselves. I had to humble myself as a mother, because I too live in the house with my mother. And it was her way or the highway. And that meant from my dad to my youngest sibling. That's how she ruled. But that doesn't work, because I remember how many times I snuck out the house, how many lies I told her. And I'm just grateful that God, the universe, saw value in my life to protect me, because I too could have been a dead runaway. So that approach doesn't work. So practicing RJ in my home makes me a better RJ circle keeper outside my home. Because how dare I try to practice it in my community, and I'm not even practicing it in my house. So our youth have to be heard, and we tried police community circles, and the one police officer wasn't ready to hear or couldn't hear, and but there's new people in place, but I don't know if there's new hearts in place. We have a new police chief, but is it a new heart? We have a brand new public safety commissioner, which our community has never had. He's being paid lots of money. But I heard his inaugural speech and he kept using the word, "We're on a mission." And I was like, mission? Oh my God, my community is not. So someone mentioned it earlier, having all the talks and all of that, but how do we allow the heart to have an opportunity to revive and restore itself if that heart does not hear from others? And I pass to Brian.
I apologize, but what was the question again? I was a little confused as to it.
We were just reflecting upon how we're going to embody this work in the world. And Durham had spoken about maybe he doesn't think that police officers and young people can sit in a circle because police officers may be showing up with some lies they believe. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, for me, the way I like to use this process in the world, I use this process pretty much whenever I interact with like a group of people. Mainly the parts of just being able to listen and give and understand, and just also keep in mind that I don't have to speak all the time, which is something that I was always trying to do back then, just to, I don't know, just keep it going, I guess. So I use this process for that. I also want to use this process to help schools out a bit, just as Shailly back then and others have helped out my old high school with this process, being able to have a sort of connection between the students and the staff there, so that way it becomes less of a students viewed the school less as a place where they just have to follow rules all day, and they see it more as a place where they're supposed to learn, and they have staff that support them with it, as a school should be. A place where it just alleviates the stress of like getting in trouble for like some petty things, for some things that aren't really that important, just because the school system is authoritative. And introducing this process there will allow for more understanding on both sides, so that way both don't have any issues with each other, or at least don't have those small issues with each other. That's what I want to, especially for getting the kids in that school to actually bond together, as well as some of them may have, they're on top of just having the teachers there and the whole other staff, some of the students themselves might have their own perceived hierarchy type thing that they have going on there. And being able to break that down, just promote the understanding of others there, so that way less issues happen, something that I want to incorporate to our restorative justice and with that. And I'll pass it on to Michelle.
Thank you, Brian. So Shailly, I think I was one of the ones that had the biggest response to the question. And I think it comes out from two places for me. One, and it's one of my, I would say, critiques of just using circles. It gives the appearance of flattening the power differentials, and that's not true. I mean, and that plays into, I think, the impact and the effectiveness, and possibly the further traumatizing of high schoolers. That's or just youth and police, because the police come in to the situation in uniform with a gun. And then we are also dealing with the issues of racism. And so, you know, unless the facilitator, the one who is calling this meeting, is going to name the power differential and expect people to recognize that, the police to recognize the power they bring into the room. And if we are not going to name the racism and how racism impacts the situation, and if we are not going to name how police came to being, that is, as trying to capture slaves, that is the root of their existence in our country today. I think it almost is like, it's for me, I'm just keep saying, it's almost like asking a rapist to insist on a circle process with the victim, and the victim has to sit there and listen to that person talk. For me, it's just that visceral, and that's why I am that's why I reacted in that way. Because I've worked crimes of severe violence. I've gone into prisons with and had the victim of the crime wanted to meet with the perpetrator, but we just don't open the doors. They have to go through a process. And at some point you say, okay, this cannot happen. I mean, there were cases where this cannot happen because the perpetrator was not in a good place. And so then you ask the person who's been the victim of the crime, what else do you need? How can, what would help you in this situation? And so you have to create, or you open yourself up to be creative, to be able to provide the victim with what they need in order to receive some healing. I just find, and if there is a police officer who comes in there and they are not in the right space, the damage that person can do for that session could be irreparable. And as a person of African descent, who epigenetically, the epigenetic trauma in my system, in my being, I want to do whatever I can to not only protect myself, but to protect our children. And so I just, is there a situation that it can happen? I can imagine, I can imagine the police working together for a while, being in a process to answer some questions around knowing your history, whatever. And then maybe at some point, the two can come together. But man, I just have some feelings around all of that. Thank you. I'll turn it over to you, Shailly.
I mean, I think we're all in agreement. I think what I'm hearing you say from the way I frame this work is a series of affinity circles that needs to take place for police officers, a series of affinity circles that need to take place for the young people, for the staff, for the faculty, for all of us, right? Because you talk about these profound lessons that that you want to awaken in police officers, if I could just use that word. I do believe that the process is a way to awaken those lessons through creating a systems for conversations that are actually holding space for the participants in a particular way. Like, I believe there can be an energetic shift in conversations and human connection and awakening to aspects of the self individually and collectively that we shy away from because the institutions thrive on disconnecting us from each other and ourselves, and from history too. So that I I am an advocate for the possibility of affinity circles, and we'll go around and see what everybody says, but I think this is the conversation about how do we create, for me, the conversation is about how do we create structures for these important conversations where there is a potential for, Gabby says the heart. I mean, I'm more shy about saying the heart, but maybe it is opening of the heart. Maybe it is opening of the, we all have different belief patterns, but there must be, and this is part of the conversation of this panel, is like, what do we really believe about each other? Like beyond all the things that have happened and what we do, what are we really to each other? And if we could get to that place to build these other conversations from, that is what I'm imagining as a potential for these conversations. Caroline?
I'm going to let what you just said sit with all of us for this moment first. Thank you. All of what is coming forward and what you're bringing forth, Michelle, and the looking at all of this for all of us speaks to that fact, or that idea that restorative justice is more than a circle, and we know that, right? And so that's a piece of the education and the looking at when we say restorative justice being brought in, lifted up, amplified, deepened, expanded, cosmoed. The cosmos float with me a lot lately. Sitting in circle is a tool within all of that. There is a framing, there is an understanding, there is a way of being in space with one another all the time. Whether I'm in this Zoom room with all of you right now, or I'm in a different place, I'm yet still in the midst of figuring out what is the restorative justice in the way that I am living every day, in the way that I am making decisions every day. And so that's the other component is, for me, as we talk about all of these things, is taking the intention to allow for the framing of it as a restorative justice, and having community know, and I know all of these experts here, not just in this panel, but in this room, know this, that it's more than a circle. And as you all were talking about police and children, I also thought about the idea, and this comes from your piece, Gabrielle, that just bringing in one or two police officers doesn't then heal it, doesn't say the healing hasn't done, right? And so the complexity of what we're talking about, the historical complexity and the moving forward, is really what arises in the food that we're having right now. And I will pass it to Gabrielle.
I sat on our city's Police Community Relations Review Board Committee 2 terms. And first of all, the way that the whole charter was set up, it was more like lipstick, right? That there was some grant money, our city applied for it, they formed this committee, but it had no real teeth. I believe I was sworn into office, 2014. And when I resigned because the police officers, my term was up, I had an opportunity to be reinstated. But a couple of months before my term was up, the police officers decided to try to pull my 7-month pregnant daughter out of her car. So I was already frustrated with the committee and its challenges and limitations that benefited this historical institution, that I was like, I can't be a part, I can no longer continue to be a part of this. So let me try to work it from the outside in. And that construct is so protected by so many laws, qualified immunity being the biggest topic of today's conversation. And how do we penetrate that, right? But then I started thinking, let me try to find some data of why we call them in the first place. Like, why do we even need the police? Like, we know historically they're here. They're in our community. They have their agenda, right, of keeping white people safe and black and brown boys locked up. Like, that's what they do. So, but then I thought about, like, how are they showing up in our community and why? And I found out, and please stay with me, I promise I'm going somewhere. I found out that almost more than half of why we call the police are human conditions. Like, there's no bomb, there's no something where a person couldn't handle where we needed an expert. These are conditions where parents aren't getting along and they're screaming at each other and the kids call the police. It's incidents where neighbors, somebody's playing the music too loud and I've asked you to turn it down nicely. You keep turning it up. I go to you again and say, please turn it down. You don't turn it down, so somebody calls the police. You're driving too close to my car, get the F back from my car. Now somebody calls the police. So we're constantly, as much as we say we don't want them in our lives, we are constantly inviting them in. And I don't know if at this point, and I know there should be conversation with the police and youth and all of that, and I get it, but where I have been shifted my energy is this new construct of not calling them at all. Like, I want to do this campaign, put it on everyone's door. We don't call the police, we solve our own problems. You can take away all the police you want. If you got that one racist police officer on your force, it's very difficult to remove him. It's the PBA, their union, is so difficult. And being on that police community relations board, I think someone alluded to or mentioned this earlier, we could not get any freaking data. The first term we asked for data on police complaints, like we need to see how many times this officer is listed in a complaint. When I left, guess what? They were still fighting for that data. That institution has so locked itself and interweaved itself in our community that it's going to take us to cut that out. We can't depend on them to do it. Their money is based, there was 2 racist police officers in my city that both resigned. Some pressure from the community, and I know there was pressure because they felt like the community was going to explode and probably hurt these officers. I think that's why they resigned, because the community was so enraged and just really fed up with these 2 dudes that if they didn't leave, something ugly would have happened and then we'd all be on lockdown. We'd all be in trouble. So they resigned. And I saw the one officer at the bank, and he came out with his little stub and he was like, I just cashed my first retirement check. And I was like, if I wasn't with my mother, ooh, but I was with my mother. And I was like, well, that's great. What legacy did you leave? Out of being an officer for 22 years in our city, what do people say and think about you? And I just walked away. So yes, there's that institution, and yes, there should be a group of people who focus on the union of doing that work. But if I can build strong children, give children this now, because my grandson, and I don't mean to ramble on, but my grandson is 4. In 10 years, he's going to be one of those teenage boys that faces an officer. So what am I going to do in the next 10 years to make my community a safer place for him and other Black and brown boys when it comes to the relationship with police officers? And not only that, there's a little boy in school right now that's going to be a police officer in the future. So we should give him this RJ training and tools and seeing everyone as human and right now. So by the time he graduates high school and goes into the police force, he's got it. He is our credible messenger of how RJ can and should work and look. I think I answered, and I pass to Brian.
I like that a lot. And I agree with it a lot. The using this work to that being able to use this work and using it in these different contexts, we could actually help our society with like even the other jobs that I weigh. When those kids grow older, they take what they learn from RJ into whatever they're going into when they're older. For me, I remember when when I still had the thoughts of probably doing something in the medical field, I was thinking maybe using RJ because I know that there's an issue in the medical field where there's a lot of doctors who don't see people as people. They see them more as paperwork, and that causes a lot of issues. And I wanted to see if there was something I could do to help change that. Maybe I could still do that from the outside and without having to be a doctor, because I don't want to do that path anymore. But there is an issue with a lot of people in these very important professions nowadays who don't have that connection with people. And but the issue, that's the issue. That's the issue, is that their job requires them to have a connection to people and they don't. And so using RJ to teach children how to form these connections at a young age, so that way they can revolutionize their industries in the future from and how those things are conducted. Those would be good. Yeah, that's all I have to say. And I'll pass it on to Michelle.
You know, listening to you, Brian, just gives me hope. And so I really appreciate your youthful voice and the way you were really grappling with how the application of restorative justice principles and other aspects of your life. I think yes, affinity groups. And I guess where I come from, I've been in this field enough that there just is there's the tendency to make things simple and not really own and embrace the complexity of it. Infinity groups and is a way, but even reimagining the process. I was talking with an Indigenous friend of mine, and said, sometimes, and they are too a restorative justice practitioner, and said, but in our communities, the circle must have the elders are the circle, and the rest of us are listening in on because it's important to listen to the wisdom of the elders. Well, I just want us to be imaginative, and I just don't want us to like even within the process of a circle, there are ways of doing circles that so that's one thing that I want to get across. I think part of some of the issues that is that there is an incident, and then there is let's just say a circle, and that circle is addressing the incident, but we don't even open our mind up to the historical why this incident occurred, and so that to me is troubling because so that's one of the things that I find challenging, that I will continue to speak to and speak at and speak into. And the third thing that DeRay said, if we're to talk about police and young people, he says, if they cannot tell the truth, if you can't tell the truth, then there cannot be a circle. And that's the part that's important for me, because I just don't want the young people further abused. I do think it's abusive to expect that. So what are the ways? And it's both and, right? There needs to be better relationship, and we need to address the the injustices. We need to transform an unjust system. So it has to be both and. We can't do one without addressing the other, or we are not being restorative. We are being abusive. I mean, I think it's abuse. So yeah, I'm done. Shailly?
I wanted to just talk about what you were, one thing you said that really I 100% agree. And I also upsets me when I see it and when it's called restorative justice, which is a conflict arises or whatever, or in the criminal justice arena when these so-called restorative justice processes are happening. And I was a public defender, so I stood next to people for, thousands of cases. I think, so the way I've sort of understood it is like vesting a restorative justice process on a lie is a dishonor to the process. So the lie is really, for me, not the human individual belief system, because I think that can shift, but it's the lie that's just, but the lie is that we're going to enter this circle. You're the offender, you're the victim, and nobody's going to change roles. We're not going to talk about the 99% of the life issues that are actually relevant for our interaction, for our evolution, for our growth that resulted in this incident. We're actually going to hold everybody in a moment of time and freeze them there. And you cannot release this label. That is oppressive for humans. That is counter-indicated for what restorative justice potential truly is. And labeling people as offenders or victims diminishes their human opportunities. And so the process, I think this is what you and I are picking, like talking about, Michelle, in my mind, is the process can be in itself oppressive instead of freedom. And one of the quotes that I've been using a lot lately is this from this book called The Timeless Way of Building. And I just picked it up while you were speaking. And it's about architecture, because to me, it is about the architecture of the circle. I really believe in circle structures. To be well articulated is important, or else the circle becomes the hammer instead of the freedom, right? And so this quote from Christopher Alexander is from a book from the 60s about building organically, architecturally. It says, patterns which are alive. The specific patterns out of which a building or a town is made may be alive or dead. To the extent they're alive, they let our inner forces loose and set us free. But when they are dead, they keep us locked in inner conflict. And so just because you have circles in a chair doesn't mean you're having a restorative process. You could be having an oppressive experience where the institution is co-opting the potential of restorative justice to keep us oppressed. So I think that's what Michelle and I were working at together. But that's why I love circles, because we worked it like, okay, I'm going to pass it on to Caroline.
In the words of Dr. Barbara King, woo-wee, exactly. There is, so I was a public defender for many decades as well. And that's what brought me to this, was seen over and over. And so there's a way in which I can almost, go to moments as you're talking, Shailly, where it's like, oh, we're going to do this and it's going to be great and it's going to fix everything. And Gabrielle, you talked earlier about lipstick on a pig. If only it were at least that. And so as we think about it and the way that you were talking about it, imagine that it really happens in its truest, deepest form, which is the exact reason that it's not being done in its truest, deepest form. That's even before you get to restorative practices, they say, bring in what we need to know about this person's life and story and the history. And when you bring in all of the history, there's the life history and the generational history of the individual, and even bringing that in, what you get is thank you very much, and boom, the same thing happens. And so we continue and we persist and we have these conversations. I look at who the participants are in this room and where they are and where they're going to carry this to. And so a large part of it is you refer to the so-called circles, the so-called. And so being in places to call that out and raise it up and share it out so that people can see. Because it is a heart experience. It is a heart opening experience. And when we open heart, all of those barriers, all of those structures are gone. It's not a rebuilding of something else. It's allowing what is truly there to be. And so I will end as I started with, ooh, we got this. We got this. So I will pass it to Gabrielle.
I'm going to marinate in everything that I've heard, and I pass to Brian.
Could you repeat the question again so I know how to answer it?
I don't even know if it was a question. This was like a reflection round. We were just reflecting on the things we'd heard and how they were landing for us in this moment.
I don't know, all of everything that I've heard so far just makes me really excited to just continue this and like finding more ways to like actually implement it more, not only implement it more within myself, but also to show it to others and to actually teach others how to do this as well. And I'll pass it to you, Mitchell.
Thank you, Brian. So, so I guess I feel like I do enjoy and move by when I engage in a good circle. It is life-giving. It is it's a spiritual experience for me, and so I wanted to maintain that kind of opportunity, that safe. Well, I don't even want to call safe because one person's safe is another person's. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation we could probably have. But just that, however, and recognizing that the way that it's being used and abused for the sake of perpetuating the oppressive system, and somehow some of us have fallen into that. That's what's troubling most for me, right? So, I also want to give a shameless plug for a book, and I only have one chapter that I co-wrote with two other women. So so it's and it's called Colorizing Restorative Justice. I don't know if you're familiar. Colorizing Restorative Justice, Voicing Our Realities. And this book is a book written by people of color who are in the restorative justice field, because we have had struggles, as you can imagine, with just with the language, and as well as the institutions that we have to engage with and in. So I would encourage everyone to get a copy of that book, because then, Brian, you can hear other ways that people are engaging restorative justice, people who identify as people of color, both in the US, Canada, and in other parts of the world, because it just is important for me, because I think about what you said, Gabby, like you're working within your community. So, what does it mean to have a restorative community? What is that kind of training and practice and that you can do within your community? Because with that goal that young person, if he or she becomes a police officer, at least they have some skills. So I think what we need to do in the field is to imagine it broadly, recognizing that it's about bringing humanity to all people, as well as healing Mother Earth. It's about that, as well as recognizing that we have these perpetrators, the systemic, institutional, that we need to hold accountable. Accountability is also part of the restorative justice process. And so how do we do both and? That provide that healing, restorative space, that that the ways that people can recognize their humanity, as well as work at those things that are still keeping them in bondage, and challenge the systems of oppression and hold them accountable. And we need to be, and what is a restorative approach to that? I mean, that's the question to ask. How do we do that restoratively? And, you know, and it's like when, so I'm always thinking in terms, when I think about this, I'm thinking in terms of crimes of severe violence. But if that person, that institution, does not see itself as a perpetrator, does not see the abuse, then how do we work with those who have been victimized by this? How do we work with them so that they can realize their power and realize their humanity and realize their strength? I think that is also the capacity of restorative justice, restorative principles, restorative justice values. So, Shailly?
I'm sorry to cut in, but can you put do you mind putting in the chat the name of the book and the authors for us, please? I'm sure we would all love to read more about it, or read it. Yeah. Thank you. So I think it was, yeah, if you could do that. Okay, so in the few minutes we have left, I will pass it around if anybody has any questions. They can put in the Q&A and we can go around and try to answer them. And as we're finishing up, if we can just share, I think we've already started to share some of our visions for our community and our nation and our individual people. Okay, somebody's just, I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the chat. Can you put the book that you mentioned also? Oh yes, absolutely. So in the last round, if we could all just share a vision that we have for restorative justice that we would like to be a part of, or the work that we're doing in the work. We didn't share the full bios. This would be a great time to just talk about what you're doing in the work, in the world, personally, professionally, and how are you using restorative justice. So I'm just going to say I love dissecting the idea of restorative justice, understanding its components, thinking about all the aspects of structure and how you create structures for the possibility of these important transformative conversations. And that is, and I 100% my vision would be that we have an alternative to 911, which is like 111. Like, let's figure, like we need, but I do think human beings need structures. I mean, I think you can have such a solid structure of the criminal legal system, solid meaning embedded in our lives, and have restorative justice not also be embedded deeply and profoundly in our relations, in our interactions, and as a resource. So I want it to be a fully viable community-based model. So that's sort of the vision I want to share. So I'm passing it to Caroline now.
Thank you. The vision and the knowing that I sit with is for us to spend time on what are we seeing in our communities as a result of restorative justice. And by that, I mean, the courts melt away, the arrests melt away. What do the communities look like? Because we have fed these practices so they're not embedded upon, but rise up through. And so it's the word of visioning in what we see and know our homes can be, our communities can be, that people are, because it's all there. And restorative justice allows the chaos to be healed. and the understanding to come. And so that's always my hope and goal and intention, is to see what is that horizon after, because we know what that is. And it's not a courtroom that's always there to have this happen. That's not it, right? I am doing work in New Orleans, which is the epicenter of not just wrongful convictions, not just the complexity of the histories and the repeated stealing of the land, and using it as a port to bring stolen people in. It is a place in which our young people are the people who are filling Angola prison, which has more incarceration than the world. And so that gets lost a lot of times. And so I do this work because I continue to work to be better at listening with heart and intuition. And knowing that when I was a public defender, I was doing good works in a system that was broken and it didn't matter. At the St. Charles Center for Faith+Action, you said to talk a little bit about that. We work to have people imagine or reimagine the criminal legal system with a restorative justice lens as a motivation to get them to be engaged in the work you're doing. So we're mobilizing people to act with information, with deep dives, with historical education. And we are in the process of building out an anti-racism program that will deal with how institutions of faith have harmed and do harm. And so that's the work that I'm doing, and I'm grateful for it. And again, I go back to vision of, I do this work because it's needed and because I see what it means to not need it anymore. So I'm really honored to be here with all of you today. And with that, I will pass it to Gabrielle.
I envision, and I actually have envisioned this for quite some time, that the last person arrested in my city was the last person arrested in my city. That the last young person that goes to our county jail is the last young person that goes to county jail. But how do we make that happen when there's a system set up for those very things to occur? And then I started thinking about connecting us to spirit, RJ as a tool to connecting us to spirit and to Mother Earth and to each other. And until that last person that goes to county jail is that last person, how can we restore some dignity to the folks that are there? And I look around, because we can talk about restorative with the police a lot, but what about food injustice? I live in a city where in 2017, it was this big announcement that our water was poisoned and toxic, and how we came together as a community and folks asked if we could do circles, in which we did 4 circles called I Am Water, and how those folks, white, brown, indigenous, and Black people all came together. And now they formed in 2017 the Newburgh Clean Water Project. And we stood before our state Senate on last week with another issue, lead poisoning. So restorative justice practices reminds us that we are connected and we do need each other. And we can simultaneously, I know I get tongue-tied on that word, develop these intergenerational conversations, at the same time looking at policies that have been in place for 100 years, but really coming together and seeing the humanity in each other. And I envision, instead of young people, I envision our government, instead of spending all this money on prisons, we use land for urban farming. You go into Bodego in my city, you can find so much junk food full of sugar and everything. And then over in the corner, you see this rotten banana and they want to charge you $1 for it. But then I can get all this junk food over here for $1. And we don't think that all that sugar plays a part. What's destroying our bodies and our souls and our feelings towards each other. And giving our children, all of us, clean water is a human right. And using RJ as a tool to get us there as well. Sorry. So RJ for me can be used in so many ways and for so many reasons, in addressing conflict or even welcoming people back into the community. And I envision, just in the work that I'm doing, is bringing people together, step one. Like doing my own shadow work, addressing my own fears, biases, or whatever I have going on with myself, and then being that light to my community to see a pathway forward. And if I can see it and others can see it, we will march towards that place of togetherness and wholeness. And I pass to you, Brian.
I touched on this earlier, but my whole thing with restorative justice at the moment is just trying to make sure that I could get the younger side onto this organization, as most of us who were on the younger side back then are starting to, go into college and stuff. So I'm trying to help get find some people from high schools and stuff who may want to join and go through the things that we experience as well as circle keepers. Yeah, so that's my goal with restorative justice too, to actually get this process and make this process available to younger people, so that way they could have the same benefits that I have had and others have had too from it. And I'll pass it on to Michelle.
Thank you, Brian. You remind me of a time when I was asked to go to a school to do a restorative justice assessment. And this school sat in the middle of like 3 competing, what you would call housing projects. And so it had bars on the windows, and a police officer as you walked in, and so I walked in because I was going to be there a couple of days to do an assessment, and I walked into the restorative justice person who was on staff, on staff but volunteering, and as we were sitting there, we talking about what this assessment would look like. A group of young ladies walked into the office, and they said, we need to do a circle. And they had their comb, and they sat down in the office and pulled up the chairs, and they passed that comb around, and they had that conversation. And they allowed me to sit there with them, and then all of a sudden they worked it out and they got up and left. And this was not something that was common in that school, but what had happened, the idea of having a circle was the first thought that these young people had, and they worked it off. And I was like, I was stunned. It was amazing to me to see that happen. Another time I went to a prison in Pennsylvania, one of the most considered on the outside one of the most atrocious prisons, but I went in because they had a full-blown restorative justice practice on how when they have conflict, how they're going to, when they're going to have circles and restored. They just had this whole restorative justice program within the prison that made prison a restorative place for people. What a concept. So it's when I know those things, that's what I hold on to, the capacity and the capabilities of restorative justice to do what needs to be done in order to restore humanity and accountability and interconnectedness and right relationship and humility and respect. And those values, I think most people, I will not say everybody, but I think most people, those values are important, especially in a day and time that we're in now. So yeah, that would be my 2 cents on this. Shailly.
Michelle, we started off, we opened with a random paragraph from Long Walk to Freedom. I'm wondering if we can ask you to read a random paragraph from your book to close us out. I'm just picking a random page 33. If you could read a paragraph to close us out. We can't hear you yet.
33 was a table of contents.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
I picked a bad number. How about 69?
Okay. 69.
A
Yeah.
long table of contents.
Yeah, well, so this is a pedagogical value of conflict for marginalized students. My work in K through 12 schools show the pedagogical value of conflict. Given the right opportunity and space for dialogue about conflicts, all youth engage more and experience greater participation. Restorative classroom-based discussions and activities allow youth to safely and critically reflect on social and interpersonal conflicts. Hence, equipping teachers and restorative ways to engage their students supports diverse students' inclusion. Peers can then build healthier and more satisfying relationships, both among each other and with their teachers. Such sustainable long-term practices reduce in-school and out-of-school suspensions and school-based violence.
It was really an honor to sit in circle with you all. Thank you so much for your presence. And Angel will take it from here. And I know Angel, we're having a half-hour lunch break right now. Yeah. So we can, I think that's, yeah, I know people have comments that really appreciated the conversation, and I know I did. But thank you, Angel, for leading us forward, and it was lovely to sit with you all.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. And thank you, because it helps me to think through and articulate clearer how, why I do what I do and, and where I am today. So thank you all for giving me that space.
Oh, thank you for being present today with us. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
What a wonderful gift.
It felt that way for me too.
Can I stay in as an attendee?
Yes, I'll switch you out.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, we're going on a 30-minute break. I'll put up a slide that reflects that, and we'll be back for our next roundtable afterwards.